Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Good day, good evening, good afternoon, based on the time zone. We are discussing 24th letter still, and I think we haven't finished the surface of this treatise yet. But anyhow, even if we discuss deeper and deeper, I think it will need more. So there is no limit in this, but we will do our best to understand still the second sign. Just to go over, to make an introduction for us all to remember, this 24th letter, it was just questioning, how can we reconcile the separation, death, and transformation happening all inside the universe from micro to macro scale? How can we reconcile these happenings with Allah's being all compassionate, all wise, and all loving? That's a tough question, and obviously that's the question Said Nursi followed to find and digest answers for himself, and he's sharing this with us, and it gives amazing points for us to consider. So we started with the first place, and if you agree, we had stated the first sign, in a way, just established a perspective for us that we are not really owner of anything. We are in the role of being a model, and the artist has the power, since the artist pays us in front, has, entitled to transform anything as he wishes. So that gives us a perspective in our with regard to our position in creation. The second sign we had started discussing, it was all about the changes, the activity and the motion, and analyzing what is behind the activity and motion. And it was connected to pleasure. The activity motion itself is considered to be pleasure, and pleasure is towards a perfection. So these were many philosophical arguments, of course, for us to consider. We talked a little bit about what is perfection, how it is connected to pleasure and activity. We did these discussions. And here, obviously, it is connected to the creator's pleasure, and it was difficult to use these words, as Said Nursi mentions. However, these are connected to creator's, absolute perfection and of course, the manifestations of his names in a way. So I'm going to take it from here. And I have my dear guests, again, Colin Hocam from UK, and Necati Aydın Hocam, this time from United States. So that's beautiful. So I'm going to start reading, but before that, Necati Hocam, I know you're just connecting to this 24th letter discussion, but I want to go to Colin Hocam if you want to say anything before we start reading.
No, I'm listening.
Oh, sorry. No, I don't either. I'm listening too.
Okay, great. Okay, I'll take from this yellow statement. Since activity indicates perfection, pleasure, beauty, and since the necessarily existent one, perfection, and the perfect one of glory unites in his essence, attributes, and names every sort of perfection, for sure, in a manner fitting for the necessary existence and holiness of necessarily existence essence, in its form suitable to his absolute richness and essential self-sufficiency, in a way appropriate to his absolute perfection and freedom from defect, he has a boundless sacred compassion and infinite. Of a certainty, there is an infinite holy eagerness arising from that sacred compassion and pure love. And from that holy eagerness arises an infinite sacred joy. And arising from that sacred joy is, if the term is permissible, an infinite holy pleasure. And from this holy pleasure and from the gratitude and perfections of creatures which result from the emergence and unfolding of their potentialities within the activity of his power arise, if one may say so, an infinite sacred gratification and holy pride pertaining to that most merciful and compassionate essence. It is these that necessitates a boundless activity. And that boundless activity in turn necessitates boundless change and transformation, alteration, and destruction. And the boundless change and transformation necessitate death, extinction, decline, and separation. That's amazing. So I'm going to stop here, go back, and Necati Hocam, I know you should have a lot of things to tell us about what's going on here. It's very abstract, talking about the qualities of the created universe and, you know, associating this with the qualities of the creator. How is this going on? How do you understand from these paragraphs?
Yeah, I think it's very, of course, deep subject. So we really need to connect the dots very well to see the picture. The problem I see in modern times that we fail to see how God is actually connected to the creation and how he in this case, behave or acts within the creation. So I think in here it provides a deep reasoning or meaning behind what is going on. But the key part here, the starting point in my understanding is to understand first there is a constant change, constant transformation, constant creation. So to the level in Surah Al-Rahman, it says, كُلُّ يَوْمٍ هُوَ فِي شَأْنٍ. So that's like basically means he's not like the first cause and establish the universe and let it everything to run. He's just watching. He's actually constantly, in action, in doing, creative acts in the universe. So that's first thing. And the other one is like, there's one names as a connected to that. Three names is very important. I think we could remember in connection to this activity. One is the name of Al-Fa'al. So Al-Fa'al is about this constant activity that he is Al-Fa'al. That's all fi'al, all acts are the acts of him and showing that's name of Al-Fa'al. The other one is, I think that we somehow, it came to my attention more recently that we have a name of Al-Khaliq. Everyone know almost that, and this is a creator being creator, but is also there is another name similar to that mentioned in Quran more than once, Al-Khallaq. So Al-Khallaq is actually, it means that he's constant creator. A creation is a constant act of him. So I think this should be our, like in a way, that starting point to see what is happening. Then now here, what Nursi is reflecting, the why does this happen? Why he is doing all these things? What is the reasoning behind that? And obviously, I think the words Nursi used in Turkish version, I remember that he used with very, let's say, very, very cautiously, right, because he doesn't want to really, somehow use those concepts we use for human, for the creator. But against that, if I think that what we have it can kind of be a wahid qiyasi, which means that a measurement for us to really understand God's attributes. So that's why I think what my understanding is basically saying he does everything he does because he enjoys to doing that. That's what is actually his, in a way, saying that. So he connecting those activity to in this case to the pleasure, and the pleasure in a way say that again with things. In the pleasure with things is something else. Let's say we get pleasure because we fulfill our needs. We get pleasure because against that we are not perfect. But in God's case, it seems like there is لذة مقدسة, he calls it, محبة مقدسة, that he uses this word. And therefore, again, it's really hard to understand. I don't know, maybe Kolnaja can help us, but I think that's what's his main point, in a way, that he's saying that God does everything he does because he really enjoy doing that. He really like doing that. He get his own enjoyment in a way that is basically unique to him. But that's my understanding. I don't know. Kolnabe?
I don't know whether I can add to that, really, because we're talking about the creator who actually is above motion and time and place and space. And so the idea of him continuously creating is I don't want to say it's misleading, because creation is continuous. But basically, Allah is immutable. He doesn't change. And therefore, that gives us a lot of difficulties in trying to even rationalize about his attributes, because our attributes, and I think this is part of the point here, our attributes are reflected. In other words, our attributes are dependent. If I want knowledge, I have to work at knowledge. I have to attempt causes. I have to go to school. I have to read. I have to do lots of things before I can reach a level of knowledge in the sense of ilm. Of course, there is intuitive knowledge, which is part of our intellect. I don't mean aql, I mean the heart, the qalb, excuse me, which is timeless as well. But generally, because we are in this nexus of cause and effect, we have to work for these perfections. We have to work towards these perfections. The thing is, this actually helps us to understand where these perfections are coming from, and that they're not from us, they're reflections, because we don't possess them. Sorry, 1 second.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yes.
these are things that have to be moved towards. You make an intention to do something and you move because you don't have it. You don't have that thing that you're looking for. And when you arrive at that thing, and then you acquire it. Whereas for Allah, the best way, I think, is thinking of Allah in terms of what they call plenitude, which basically means fullness. He has everything in a full sense. So when we talk about any of his attributes, we always have to make this caveat and say that, okay, Allah is knowing, but he's not knowing in the way that I'm knowing, because my knowing is contingent, it's a reflection, it's dependent. But Allah's knowing, for example, is without means, without any prelude, without any preliminaries. He knows in a huzuri way, in a presential way. And for example, his joy, if you can, speak, and Ustad is always very guarded in the way he talks about these things. If you can talk about divine joy, it's not the kind of joy that we know, because our joy comes and it goes, and it's in degrees. Whereas Allah's joy is a full joy, if you can imagine that, an absolute joy that has no flaw, no cessation. It doesn't end. It's not infinite in the mathematical sense, because that's meaningless. When we predicate that of Allah, Allah has infinite knowledge. No, Allah's knowledge is absolute. In other words, it's full. And I don't mean full in like the cup is full, because there is no cup. It's just full, and you can't imagine there being more joy. But it's not a joy that changes. Our change comes from his changelessness. And for there to be change, there has to be changelessness. And for there to be changelessness, there has to be change. And so I think what Ustad is doing here is setting up this binary whereby the created beings have to move along a spectrum from 0 to wherever to acquire perfections. Whereas Allah, those perfections all exist all together in a fullness that we can't imagine.
Yeah, that's amazing. I was watching the famous movie Interstellar, if you know. So there was a conversation over there. There was a professor, they were questioning the universe. They are making calculations, on wormholes, how to transfer to other galaxies, this and that, and making ontological explanations, during a conversation. And one of them is talking about love, and the professor says, I think love is a different, like, even somebody passes away, still I'm loving him or her. So that's inherent in my, that's inherent to me. So that really says something to me. I mean, looks like there's a higher dimension that I cannot formulate or I cannot explain, but I'm so sure that, this love, feeling of love, just the source should be a higher dimension. It was a very short conversation, but I think it is very relevant here, maybe to understand also. Like everyone understands this connection, there's a connection. And this is further questioning, maybe to the more details, how it is happening. So questioning, and as we know, the coming paragraphs, Nursi indicates, his questioning is never enough for him to get, satisfying answers. So he's getting to the details in a way, in my understanding. But may I ask, like, you mentioned all these activities versus the creator's immutable attributes. Can you also talk about the destruction part? I mean, I think it is clear activity is something good, but why alteration and destruction, transformation, and yet extinction and decline and separation and death? How do we put these parameters into equation?
Is that addressed at anyone? Maybe Najati?
Yeah, I just put it forward, but we can start with you, Colin Hocam.
I shouldn't have unmuted, should I? Well, if you remember those days when we had blackboards in school, I don't even think you can say the word blackboard now because it's not politically correct. But we had blackboards, and when you fill the blackboard with whatever you're writing,
whiteboards these days.
These are whiteboards, right? Okay. Well, in the old days, you would fill the board with writing, and then there's no more board to write on, but you have a million and one things you want to say. So you rub some of the board clean and you put other words there, and then you may rub more of that when you need more room, and you may rub the whole board and you may start to write different things, but it's still all writing, it's all intelligible. It's all basically saying very, very similar things, but because you've got so much that you want to say, the blackboard isn't enough. So you have to, the boundless change and transformation comes because the creation is limited. The creation is like that limited sized whiteboard on which you have endless words to write. And so they won't all fit on. I mean, it's a very crude analogy, but I think it works. And sometimes you write on top of that writing, in what they call a palimpsest, and you can see the writing that you did before underneath. And this is how the creation happens, because there is boundless activity, and therefore the things that have been written have to be wiped and new words have to be written. And that, of course, necessitates, if you translate that into, the language of human life, it necessitates death, decline, and separation. These are inevitable side effects of this whole system.
Thank you, Hocam. Is it okay to always associate negative meaning with these wordings, or all associate maybe positive meanings to these words? Like, we know Nursi says that is not separation, for instance. If that is not separation, then it's a positive connotation anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I use the analogy of the whiteboard, because no one would tell the teacher, why are you doing that? Why are you wiping out all of those beautifully written words? And And the teacher will say, well, did you understand them when I wrote them? Are they in your mind now? And the pupil will say, oh, yes, I know what you've written. They say, well, that's all you need to know. You've got it in your mind. You know, don't worry just because it's not there. It's there somewhere. It's in your mind right now. So it's going to be somewhere. So nothing, it becomes extinct. Things decline and they die and they separate, but they're not lost.
Yeah,
so there's nothing negative really about these things.
Yeah, wonderful. Nejat Hocam, do you?
Yeah, I think it's very, very good. I like this board metaphor. Nursi, in 20th letter, he actually used another metaphor as well, as an arable farm metaphor, in a sense that if you have, let's say, limited farm, and if you're planting something, so you plan to harvest because that's your objective. Now you have a lot to do. Your objective is, as we do in modern times, try to plant and harvest as much as possible. Now you see, use this analogy and says, for the creator, the entire universe is a farm, and he used those atoms or particles as a field, arable field, and he plant and harvest new universe every second. So in a way that basically we need to look at this act of creation in a way that planting and harvesting something to send to another dimension. So, and then now if you have against, as Kodinaja mentioned, infinite things almost to really plant and harvest want to get that. So you will constantly plant and harvest, that there will be room for the new one coming, because the field, though, is giant when you look at the universe from our perspective, but compared to infinity is nothing. So that is, in this regard, I think the metaphor that is both look in a positive way and also telling us that basically this is not like a, all these things are planned acts of infinite power and wisdom that's happening for a reason. That, as you know from your experience, that what it takes, why you do the farming, he's actually doing the farming at very large scale from moment to moment. It's not only just what the activity you see, let's say, on the planet Earth or on your yard or on your body. Those are also a type of farm that he is actually planting and harvesting. But if you think at larger scale, that you see the entire universe at subatomic level becomes a giant farm that you see he's constantly planting and harvesting. There is a constant new universe being created and harvested and a new one coming. That is, I think, that's what he used that. And that's, in this regard, if you look at it, you don't see this destruction as something negative. You see some things really planned, desired, and very positive. So that's why I think, the analogy that can work very well as well.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you very much. And please, everyone, feel free to contribute with questions and comments. I move on to the next paragraph. That's a very nice one that I want to also put on the table. At one time, the benefits shown by human science and philosophy. Translator's note, you may agree or not, of course. Human science and philosophy refers to those philosophies which are derived from human reason and which hold science to be the source and measure of truth rather than divine revelation. So by human science and philosophy concerning the aims of beings appeared to me to be extremely insignificant. I understood this, that such philosophy leads only to futility. Consequently, leading philosophers either fall into the swamp of nature, or they become sophists, or they deny divine knowledge and choice, or they call the creator self-necessitating. At that point, actually, I want to discuss this part. I don't have a problem, but I feel like this paragraph is also open to be misunderstood. I can also play devil's advocate, but I think it will help opening, what Nursi is after. Necati Hocam, can I ask you how Said Nursi defines philosophy here, maybe, in your opinion, and how he positions philosophy and how he finds the findings of philosophy somewhat insignificant to explain what's going on?
I think philosophy, as it used to be, used or meant, is basically general study of the world, what they call natural world. So, and therefore, when you still get PhD, so that's a doctorate of philosophy. So it's like that's they call natural philosophy. So I think that. That's what he means, in most places when he refers philosophy, like in the 12th word, essentially is referring to, modern science as we know today. So, and by science in general, both physical science and social science, all actually falls onto that one. So the reason he thinks that basically science is study of what is happening, why it's happening. Is, in other words, science is study of cause and effect, try to find the cause and then understand why something happening. So in that case, what he's saying the way that science explain those changes, because basically, I when I look at it even in a teaching, I say that essentially, science is all about change and cause, because you see change and you want to understand the cause of change. And then perhaps you can talk the consequences of the change. In other way, you have 3C that science wants you to see. So what he's saying, look, the way you look at it and frame it within your secular materialistic worldview is essentially is very narrow one. It cannot give us really the full picture. And it's not really, if you look at the, plant, the tree, animal, stars, the molecules, whatever you study, that the way you study and explain, you say, this is happening because of those. You're actually giving very, very narrow, limited meaning to that, amazing activity with many, many deep meaning and deep purpose behind that. So for that reason, I think what he's saying is, and also he's saying is like, because like, I think the reason he says in a way that this become nonsense complete, because this is like something extremely meaningful. They're giving you messages. So like you have the most elegant book ever written, and you discover that, but you don't know how to read. But the way that you're treating this most eloquent, most elegant book is like as if this is a meaningless piece of paper with just bunch of shape and and then you try to measure the size of the shape, the relationship between the shape, but you don't have any understanding on the meaning because you don't know how to read. I think that's the reason he's saying that, all this scientific reading of the universe in terms of understanding what is happening is literally saying it's a nonsense. It doesn't, because those guys don't know how to read, and they are turning this most meaningful book into completely meaningless one. And that's the reason I think he's completely trashing out this perspective in a way that looking at the creation in Ismi perspective and trying to give the meaning in Ismi perspective and say, that's all. This is what does mean. This is three is this, that's all. And this is how you can look at it in terms of cellular level, molecular level, atomic level, and understand that you explain it. But when you say, is there any meaning there? No, don't look at it even. But that's really, as Nursi explained very well in 12th word, it's like you have this most elegantly written Quran, and you just, talks about its shape, its composition, its the resource, the material used in that one, but you do not even know it is a book. And you say it's just meaningless shape. That's, I think, the part, my understanding, that's really referred. I don't know, Kolinabi?
I couldn't put it better myself, actually, Najati Bey. Science doesn't work on value. It doesn't know what value is. That's not its job. and it's the scientists and the issue of ideologization of science, the coming of pseudoscience and scientism and all of these perversions of science, which do not see meaning in the creation. And for the scientific method, which is perfectly fine when it does what it's supposed to do, when the scientific revolution happened, they had to get rid of Aristotle's, Aristotle's four causes. The final cause, which is the teleological aspect, they had to get rid of because that wasn't in line. It didn't comport with their agenda. So you can see today biologists who are studying life close up, and they say, well, there is no purpose in for example, in human life, in human evolution. For example, we take evolutionism. There is no ultimate purpose, and so there is no teleology. There is no idea of a final purpose in the scientific method. It's not built in, and we shouldn't expect it. But the thing is, scientists then cannot talk about meaning, because meaning, it doesn't compute, and for them it's just rubbish, garbage in, garbage out, as they say. So anything that is to do with meaning or value, and of course Descartes didn't help, because he split the existence into things that can be measured and things that can't be measured, and the things that can't be measured, he declared that they were subjective. And therefore what Nursi, I think, is saying here is that human science and philosophy, and we have to bear in mind that science and philosophy used to be the same thing, as I think Najati said many, many years ago, centuries ago. But philosophy basically means looking for knowledge with one's own criterion and without the help of revelation. And this is to be expected. After the scientific revolution, this is what happened. And what he's saying is, look, these philosophers, they don't even say that there is a meaning to the creation. There's no teleology. There is a kind of teleonomy, which according to the biologist is like a pretend teleology. It appears as though there is a purpose to things, but it's not really a purpose. And that really, as Najati put it beautifully, it's like having a beautiful illuminated manuscript, in beautiful, calligraphic, with calligraphic artistry, like from the 14th century, inlaid with gold and beautiful lettering, and all of it illuminated, and then using it to light the fire, because you can't read it. And you say, well, it's good for lighting a fire, but you're supposed to read the book and appreciate it, and luxuriate in the beautiful writing and the cover and the meanings from it. But no, you put it on the fire, and that's about it. That's about all it's good for. And I think this is what Ostad is saying here. The aims of creation appeared to be extremely insignificant if you listen to what these people are saying. And therefore, he concludes, this kind of philosophy leads only to futility. And then he says the philosophers then, either they become naturalists or they become sophists and say that, nothing exists actually. They deny divine knowledge and choice, or they call the creator, this is a mistranslation actually, self-necessitating it's mujib bidzat, and it doesn't mean self-necessitating, but I'm not sure whether it's relevant to go into what it does mean.
That's an excellent part. You both elaborate. Thank you. I think this is so valuable at this point. Can we also get more into that part? I find it important. Like, okay, we got that, just science is not interested in value, true or not, but how come at the end of the day, this attitude of science or philosophy, to say here, how does this lead to naturalism or becoming sophists? If we put it in modern terms, maybe I was thinking of maybe being sophistai. It's very very similar to postmodernism. I think, like, you're saying that, okay, truth can be anything. Like, you're really getting rid of all principles, or you're getting rid of any boundaries. You're saying that is possible, this is possible, that's true, that's also true. So I feel like postmodernism is very similar to being sophistai in this sense.
That's a great comparison, Harun, actually. Can I use that?
Yes, of
Because
course, you know,
because sophistry is an archetype, you know.
right, or archetype. All Nursi
Yeah.
uses you know, just old-fashioned naturalism, and sophistry is, you know, of ancient philosophy.
Because what's the alternative? They actually, we shouldn't be too hard on them, because what do you expect them to believe in if they don't want to believe in God? They have to
Yes,
believe in nature. They have no choice. And
but
so,
I
like,
wonder, why do you think these categories are there? I mean, how does this type of scientific thought or philosophy leads to naturalism or postmodernism, to say?
because there's no other road anywhere else, because there's only two roads. You know, it's the law of excluded middle. You know, it's either this or not this. It can't be a third thing. So if there's a creator, then fine, and everything follows on from that. If there's not a creator, how do you explain existence? You have to attribute it to the things themselves. Who else will you attribute it to, unless you say, okay, it's just a brute fact, it's just there. And as you said, and I love this comparison, the postmodernism is sophistic all the way through, because it deals with nonsense. It deals with 2 and 2 actually equal 5, because that's a different kind of truth, and you can't debate it, because you know, my truth is true and your truth is true, you know, and all of this absolute garbage. And then, of course, they have to deny divine knowledge and choice. And if they do accept a creator, then they describe him in a way which actually means that he's not a creator at all, really. So they have no alternative. Where do they go? Where do you go if you don't believe that there's a creator?
Yeah, wonderful. Necati Hocam, do you have?
Yeah, I think Naja explained it in previous round as well, that does, you know, change in explaining the causal mechanism, or the change in the universe. So when they somehow gave up on the fourth cause, that's the telos, the final cause, but they also actually gave up on the third one as well, which is the efficient cause. So they give because efficient, they gave it this to nature. So in a sense that they, attribute let's say, knowledge and power and consciousness, to nature, as if like nature is something out there. And therefore Nursi is telling, look, what you call in nature is actually, you're naming God as a nature. He's saying that. But you don't want to believe in a personal God, and you want to really just give his attribute to nature in totality. Nursi will say, no, you can't do that. You have to give it to every single atom. He's saying that either you have to accept actually one God who is in control of everything, or you have to accept that every single atom is has an attribute of God. So I think that's what's the part he's saying, like, as Konuja mentioned, what is the source of all this change? Who is doing all these things? What is the efficient cause behind that? So, and if you don't accept God as a efficient cause behind that, so therefore, I really, it's one of I love it in Surah Al-Nahl. It's really amazing. It says, أَفَمَنْ يَخْلُقُ كَمَنْ لَا يَخْلُقُ أَفَلَا تَذَكَّرُونَ. Is the one who creates, can it be equal to the one who cannot create? So in a sense that you're saying that basically, then it says that, إِن تَعُدُّ نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ لَا تُحْصُوهَا إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَغَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. Then it says that وَالَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ لَا يَخْلُقُونَ شَيْئًا وَهُمْ يُخْلَقُونَ. Everything else that you supplicate, they are being created. Those created, how they can create and give you something. So I think that's what the issue here is. If you do not accept God as the source, then now you have to accept those created being to be creator. But does the dumb thing ever? Because they do not have their own self-sufficiency. They themselves contingent being, being created constantly depends on the infinite power. I think that's the part that he's saying, that it's really ironic in a way that how does naturalism, how does materialism, it's actually being imposed on in the name of science, while it's completely absurd, it's a nonsense in a way that they're telling you that, you know what, this dust and dirt and rocks and, can actually build a giant palace, can make a device better than, let's say, your cell phone, and you believe in it. And that is complete nonsense that normally you should never accept it. Therefore, when you read the treatise on nature, Nursi is extremely angry at those people, saying this is, even a donkey cannot accept such idea because it's completely absurd to accept that. But unfortunately, it's very weird in a way that it's imposed from the very early age on everyone, and particularly when you go through the college education. It seems like to say this is all work of God. God is the source. They somehow belittle you. They say you are you're not scientific. You're not belong to this place. So it's very, very weird. It's like everything upside down. And that's the part I think Nursi is I think against referring to my understanding.
Yeah, very nice discussion. Thank you. Any more comments? Otherwise, I will go to the next paragraph, where Nursi talks about the solution to himself. At that point, Divine Mercy sent the name Al-Wise Hakim to my aid, and it showed me the great aims of creators. That is to say, every creature, every artifact is a dominical missive for conscious beings to study. This aim satisfied me for a year. Then the wonders in the art of beings were unfolded. The former aim began to seem deficient. Another much greater aim became apparent, which was that the main aims of creatures look to their maker. I understood that it consists of creatures presenting to his gaze the perfections of his art, the embroideries of his names, the embellishments of his wisdom, and the gifts of his mercy. It is their being mirrors to his beauty and perfections. This aim satisfied me for a long time. Then the miracles of divine power and attributes of lordship, that's Shunat Rububiyet, in the extremely swift changes and transformations within the astonishing activity in the art and creation of things became apparent. The former aim too began to appear insufficient. I understood that a necessitating cause, a motive, was necessary as great as that latter aim. It was then that the causes in the second sign and the aims in the indications to follow became apparent. It was made known to me with the complete certainty that the activity of divine power in the universe and the constant flow of beings are so meaningful that through them, the all-wise maker causes all the realms of beings in the universe to speak. I think I'm going to stop here. Most likely, even we can take back, I think it's great to talk about these things. And I wonder, I have several questions to ask you to open more. Maybe it's good to start with how Said Nursi learns from the name Hakim. What kind of methodology is that? I mean, as a Muslim, how does this help me? I mean, he's questioning about the universe, as hard as a scientist, and being satisfied as an ordinary person of heart, how this reconciles. In other words, when I look at his quest, he says, I find something from Al-Hakim name, and it's enough for me for 1 year, but then it's not enough. Then the reality unfolds. And then, another layer comes and he's not satisfied. Another, dimension unfolds. So can you please just go over these, statements and tell us how this type of tefekkür, happens, and how could he achieve that? Necati Hocam, maybe starting with you.
Yeah, difficult question. You should start with Konna.
That's fine. I mean,
yeah, I think again, I think obviously it's it shows that he was very contemplative. He was absolutely thinking, reflecting, trying to understand, and obviously, as we saw, in a sense that since he treats the universe as a meaningful book, and actually, as he mentioned in the 12th word, he treats the universe as the giant Quran. So if the universe is Quran, obviously, that means as you recite and ponder on the Quran, you recite and ponder on the universe as well. And it seems like Nursi was really treating the universe as a Quran, and he was really pondering, what is the message? What's going on? Why he is doing all this, changes and creation constantly? What is the wisdom behind that? I think that was really, he was reflecting on that. And again, in a way that he really see that, he will see and reflect, but it seems like he will not take his answer as an absolute answer, and he will revisit, and when he rethink, it's not like just taqlid in a way that he will repeat what I knew before. It seems like he's actually redoing, like in a way that, is it all? Is that all? Is there anything beyond that? So like this, hal min mazid, is there more? So it seems like he's always looking after for more, because his assumption is that there has to be something more, because as he observing, remember he says in a second stage that he deeply reflect and observe the changes. Like you see, there are some amazing things that no, let's say, human or other being really see and reflect on them. So if that's the case, then now he says his answers become insufficient, because you can go and, let's say you become aware of, the flowers, many things that are really being shown and no one is really paying attention. So like even I remember the guy who discovered this snowflakes, that finding every one of them is different. He said that he feels really terribly bad, because every time this piece of artifact is falling on the ground and melting without someone is paying attention.
Right.
But who can pay attention to every snowflakes on the earth every time it's falling down? But if every one of them is a unique piece of art, then now the first stage, point is not going to be sufficient. That's how you see that basically he will, if it's not sufficient, it seems like he was really looking for further explanation. That's what I think, what is happening with his tefekkür. And also it's very clear when Nursi says tefekkür is his like maslak, means his way of really, like his way of life and his way of thinking, that you can see he is up to his word. He is doing that. That's an example that indeed he was very, very contemplative person. He wouldn't take something and just accept as is because, let's say, because, someone told, because he gets it, let's say the Quran says. No, he will try to really, break it down, reflect on it, and get the deep meaning behind that.
Also, is this help of Hakim name for the sake that since Allah is Hakim, definitely Hakim name will give me an answer. It has to give me an answer if I have a sincere question. Is that the connection?
Well, I think, again, Hakim and Hikmah is basically also purpose, means that whatever he does is for reason. That's why I think that's the reason. Since he has this, he knows Allah is Al-Hakim. If it's all wise, that means there has to be wisdom behind everything. But if he does something that's really is let's say, we don't know wisdom, that it just doesn't make sense. That's why he look at the wisdom. I think that Hakim is basically his starting point, that he knows who is the source and he knows the attributes of the source. So as a result, that he is trying to see, the sign and the reflection of that attribute in the creative acts of creator. That's what I think how Hakim helped him to not give up. There must be, what you find out is not sufficient as a hikmah, as a telos in what you observe, keep looking, you'll find something. That's, I think, was the thing he had it, and he got this from, in this case, Al-Hakim, in my understanding.
Wonderful. Colin Hocam, I want to hear from you.
Again, I can't add anything to Najati Bey's expiation of that, apart from to say that it could be that because thinking about the purpose in creation is automatically the domain of hikmah, and so all-wise, the name all-wise may have come to him. He may, at the back of his mind, have known that what he's looking for is meaning. And if we use the analogy of the book, this beautiful, illuminated, gilded book, you can tell, even if you're not a bibliophile, even if you're not an expert, you can tell that, this is different to other books, and it's not the kind of book that you would throw on a fire. So why are people throwing it on a fire? Why are they not using it? And this is a dua, contemplation is not just sitting there and thinking about stuff. It's searching for meaning. And that search is a dua, and Allah is mujib. He gives answers to duas, especially answers to guidance. Answers to prayers for guidance. So Ustad Nursi is thinking about, how can these people decry and denounce, the whole universe as something very, very trivial and insignificant. And then Allah would have made to him clear and obvious the issue of the fact that he's all-wise, a hikmah. So the hikmah comes into his mind, and then he starts to apply that. Because all of these things are given by God's grace, all the thoughts that we get in our head when we sit down and start to think, which is itself a dua, they all come from outside of us, but also within us, because there is part of us that is actually part of the unseen realm, our inner faculties. And so we draw on our inner faculties, and Allah will provide the answer, and He did for Ustad Nursi. And then he started to think about hikmah, and then that satisfied him. He said this is a whole journey that he made, isn't it? Like, the first thing that he realized was that every creature actually is a kind of letter that God writes for us to study. This language here is a little bit intimidating, the English, and it's actually now being retranslated as we speak. This is actually being worked on, the 24th letter, and I can tell you it's not easy. So this Dominical missive, what it means is Allah writes you a letter and He asks you to read it. In other words, He writes that beautiful book, and He expects you to read it and not just to put it on the fire as firewood. And so when Ustad realized, this is what things are created for. They're created in order to be letters that we read. And of course, that's only a partial answer, but it satisfied him. He says for a year, for some time it satisfied him. And then another cycle of thinking begins, and so on.
And since we are discussing, I feel like, can we say that's the Nursi's maybe epistemological construct to explain, the changes and transformations in the universe? Like, at one point he starts and, he kind of progresses in his perspective. And maybe we can say he is looking more holistic, at the end compared to the beginning of the questioning.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it becomes a whole picture. And this is the kind of consciousness that we've lost, I'm afraid. Unfortunately, we don't have a holistic consciousness. We have an analytical consciousness, which is linear, and meaning is not linear. Scientists, and he's talking about scientists and philosophers, The thought process of the scientific method is linear in nature, and meaning isn't, and therefore we miss the meaning. And this is why the harfi view, the harfi view is non-linear. The ismi view is linear. This is why we find it difficult to have that view, because we've been trained, as Najati said, we've been brought up in this naturalistic, atheistic education system to think analytically. Now, analytical thinking is very helpful. You know, you can make a lot of progress because everything that we build, everything that we do, you know, technologically depends on the analytical consciousness. But if that's all you have and you don't have a holistic consciousness, then you miss meaning. And again, what do you expect? You know, if you cut one of your feet off, you will limp. You know, you're not going to be able to run. And therefore, you know, if you don't believe that you should have 2 feet and you cut one of them off, then that's it. So if you don't believe there's a creator, then you're going to limp, you know, conceptually. So we can't expect them to be any different. There needs to be a restructured consciousness, I think, for us to get back on track.
Yeah, thank you, Colin Hocam. I think these part became so fruitful and valuable. I mean, they're all valuable, but I felt this part is especially very important, and it really makes sense. As always, you know, we are in very last few minutes, and I want to turn back to Necati Hocam. Do you have closing remarks? We're about to close.
Yeah, I think those 3 perspectives is very important to reflect on it. So in a way, he's saying, look, philosophy or secular science look at the universe as just, you know, meaningless material objects, arrangements, by saying that this is extremely meaningful book, to the level he will say it's the Qur'anic Kabir. But then he will say it's like everything is a message from God, everything is ayah, as Quran says. But he says that was sufficient only up to a certain point. Then when he realized the meaning is way beyond what we can comprehend as a conscious being, then in second stage he said, oh, perhaps that God himself is, you know, observing, seeing his own works, his own artifact, his own meaningful acts. So that was the second stage. Now the third stage, that's why I really want to hear what Kulnabi will say on that one. On the third stage, he's saying, no, actually, that I realized that now everything is speaking, is not just a piece of paper, some message written on it. They are directly talking, speaking, as the Quran says, yusabbihu, tusabbihu, sabbaha. They are making that, saying something. They are making tasbih. So he's saying to reach to this level is basically making the creative act is a way of making the whole universe to talk, to speak, is the act of speech directly talking to you. So if you open your ears, you will hear that, he will say. So, but then when I look at this analogy, I kind of see the second one is a book that God himself can read, see as well. The third one I see is like an audio book, in which that basically is a book that you don't have to read. It can read itself. You can just hear it. Now, then my question is, why does the third one was satisfactory, and how big the difference between the third approach from the second approach or second perspective that was really satisfactory to Nursi? That's really a question. Whenever I read this part, I somehow have it, you know, in back of my mind, and I think Kollabi will be the best one to hear what is the answer to that. I don't know.
No, it won't, because you've just given the answer. Again, I can't say anything more than that. You know, I can just echo it and say that you know, the beings that we see in the universe are their own words. They are words themselves, you know. And there's a tawafuq with this, because I've been reading a book on wholeness of nature, so-called nature. And there is a line in that which almost directly, you know, can be compared with this, when he says that, you know, the beings, it was a study actually of the German writer Goethe, who had, he's very famous for having a sort of holistic rather than an analytical mind. And he saw that you know, like he talks about a plant, as being its own language. He talks about seeing that plant within its own intensive depth as a whole being, and seeing that it actually has its own language. It is its own language. And this is exactly what Nursi is saying here. He says, it's as if the beings of the earth and the skies and their motion and actions are the words of their speech. And also, not just their motion is their speech, but the beings themselves are their own speech. In other words, they are words. So, as you said, Najati, this is like I didn't see the sequence actually, but there are 3 steps here, and it's like this is the synthesis. I don't want to sound too, what is it? The thèse, antithèse, and synthèse, the whole thing. But is it Hegelian? Or is it Engels or Marx? I don't know. Anyway, the thing, synthesis. But it is a synthesis because
Hegelian, maybe. Yeah.
At the end of the day, there is nothing now that is not touched by this, because first you had that the aim was this, and then the second that everything was a letter, and that we read it, but then actually we are also part of that letter. So in this 3rd step, there is nothing that is exempt from being as you said, an audiobook. I love that explanation. It's not just a book that you read, it's an audio book. In other words, it's a living book. Now, you can't really go further than that, because you've concluded that everything in the universe is a living, breathing advertisement, if you wish, a living, breathing, talking word that points to its creator.
I was really listening to thinking this way. I was saying that in a way, perhaps you can say there's nothing but I and you in terms of me and creator, and everything else is just his way of talking to me. So which means that if I look at everything as basically a form of communication, if I see that he speaks to me through tree, through bird, through clouds, through the event in my life, that I don't see anything beside myself and him, because everything are actually his message. Everything is from him, everything is about him. That's why I thought the 3rd stage, that Nursi reached to this level in which that now you directly, at the level that you communicating to the creator, and you see he speaks to you directly through everything, because everything become just a live speech from the creator. I don't know. And that was really, I was really reflecting on this recently, to try to see what does it mean, because I remember one guy, he wrote it, I and thou, in a way that like there's only me and God, nothing else. So I was reflecting on that to see really, if I can see everything, just basically from God, about God, then my perception of everything will change, the event, the object, because they are not really from them. It's God actually speaking to me. Then I need to look at, the message and the meaning and the wisdom behind that.
Yeah, it's actually, we could say it's Ahadiyya combined with Rahimiyya. It's this exclusive mercy in a unique way. In other words, everything in the creation is created just for you, as Najati, right? And there's no one else actually, because everything else is a writing that you are reading, including what I'm saying now to you. So I've been created for you to read. But actually, I also see the world in that way. So everyone sees the world in that way. But that doesn't really detract from the fact that there is, as you say, only you and I. In other words, Allah, and there is me, and there is no one or nothing else. But of course, that's only a partial vision. But in the truth, reality is that I am a dependent I. And therefore my existence is very, very different. And everyone else is also a dependent I, and they see all the things the same. But all of these I's can join together in one huge dependent I. And then we see the cosmos, the whole cosmos, as one thing, as a unity. And we're all part of it. So we don't lose our I-ness. We are just all parts of the same whole. That's all.
Yeah, that's amazing, flowing amazingly. But I need to stick with the time also. Hopefully, I'm going to take it from here next week of new meanings. So may Allah all help us with his name Hakim as he helps Said Nursi. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much. Thank you.